And we're live with our 275th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Excited to be here as usual. We have some other really good episodes coming up. Today is just me and Ken, but we are going to summarize some of the output from last week's OpenGrep discussion because it seemed to strike some nerves across multiple different channels that Ken and I monitor on a daily basis. And also some more industry news type stuff, that things that have happened in the last week that will be good to catch up on. Outside of that, though, I am headed to Phoenix this week for CactusCon. Ken will be there as well. Thursday night, we will be camping out probably in a bar close to the close in Mesa somewhere. I'm assuming, Ken, unless you have other plans. Watch the space or join Slack. We will notify people where we're going to be. If you happen to be at CactusCon, it's a little bit of a pre-con event this year, but would love to see people, at least, say hello and chat. So watch for that. That'll be in a couple of days. And yeah, outside of that, we do have our Harnessing LLMs for Application Security training. That is coming.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, actually end of next week, right? Or am I off?
Oh, yeah, damn. All right.
February 20th and 21st. That's a virtual training, so you can attend wherever you happen to be, as long as you can listen to us, or you can join the Zoom. And we still have a couple of seats available. We'd love to have more people sign up. And yeah, talk through how to use LLMs. We've learned a lot in the last like 2 months, right? Like my process is evolving, what we do on a daily basis for using it to summarize all sorts of stuff that we get from clients as we are trying to analyze things for vulnerabilities. So training.absolute.appsec.com. Go ahead and jump into that. Outside of it, today's episode is sponsored, and we need to talk about this, Ken, but we're going to switch up this week. It'll be sponsored by Redpoint. Redpoint Security specializes in code security by coders, which is bolstered by years of experience testing applications and conducting code reviews against all types of applications. Redpoint also offers secure code training to help ground your teams in better security practices across the development lifecycle. So check out redpointsecurity.com for more information and put your company on a path to better security. Thanks to Redpoint. Sweet. All right. So to get into it today, and I know we're a little bit behind, just life happening, but to get into it, let's talk OpenGrep. There was quite a bit of discussion in Slack after we had the podcast last week, including representatives from a couple of the organizations that are a part of the OpenGrep consortium or organization, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, Ken, what was your takeaway, right, of the discussion after we got done? I know you and I kind of settled on, okay, this is an active community. OpenGrep overall is a good thing, right? Because it shows that people care. But what was your takeaway from the post discussion that we had in Slack? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, so yeah.
No, it's fine. I went back and I was just rereading because so one of the companies that is involved in the product, for one, well, you can go in Slack, so you can see this. So I'll just say, like, Endor Labs came out and said, we're not using Semgrep. Because I know I had made a comment about probably it's companies that are using Semgrep. Most likely it's companies using Semgrep in their product that, came together to build OpenGrep. Endor Labs, it sounds like, is not one of those companies using Semgrep's engine and rules, from what they said. So that's the first interesting point. second, I guess, and that's more of a correction than I guess. It is an interesting point, though. It's like, okay, there's a company involved in this that doesn't actually use that in their product. Interesting. Second to that is, so my assumption was this only affected rules. The change only
Mhm.
affected rules, and
Yeah.
the second clarification was that in December they and by the way, just to sort of also bring this point up before I continue, is that the announcement about Semgrep's, I believe, Series D, $100 million influx to do, kind of whatever. Anyways, people are latching onto AI because they realize how useful it is. Thank goodness. But in any case, we didn't know about the Series D $100 million thing before last week's conversation because it came out after, or we saw it after. I can't remember which.
No, yeah,
But I think it came
it
out
came out
after.
on Wednesday. So yeah. Yep.
There you go. There you go. Sorry, I just need to silence my phone. So all right, so that's another thing I need to mention. And then the other point that was interesting was about the engine. So the engine actually did have some restrictions, I guess. So some features were pulled out of the project. They were moved into the commercial version of Semgrep. I don't know who the people are or why, but the representative had mentioned, and I'm trying to be like, I don't know, I don't want to throw people's name out here or whatever, but you can go into our Slack and actually see this conversation. But the quote was, some people are calling this a rug pull. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. I can't say whether there's validity to that. But what I can say is that there were modifications to the engine, and it does sound like the things that were removed were considered experimental. So I don't.
Mhm.
Again, I can't really personally speak to you know any of that. Trying to think what else was interesting because I think Paul McCarthy also um, said something interesting about. I think he was saying, and again, I don't want to misspeak, but I think he was saying like, hey, I some if I build rules for something, I want to be able to use those. Um, I want those rules to be useful to everybody and whatnot. And again, like whether or not that this change impacts community rules for things other than a product, I still maintain it doesn't really impact anybody unless the rules part of it doesn't impact anybody unless you're talking about, you're putting this into your product. There are some other things like I encourage people to go and look at that conversation, but I guess that the engine changing would be a slight twist that I wouldn't be super happy with personally, right? Like I think like the rules thing and just saying like, hey, anything the community built, you can't like put into your product and make money off of. It's like, all right, whatever, fair, I don't care, sure,
Mhm.
fine. But if you're altering the engine and restricting its usefulness, um, and people relying on whatever that engine had, uh, whatever was in that engine when they had built their rules. And if that, I guess what I'm saying is if that broke, if that moved to those features being pushed into the commercial engine broke people's, builds or their checks or whatever, yeah, that would be obviously problematic. I, however, don't know if that's the case since again, these were experimental features and I don't know how much these features had an impact on those things. So like, what can I say? Right. I don't know. But then I think it does get going back to point two that we were just talking about. I think, and I'm going to hand it over to you at this point. I do find it interesting that all that happened, and then we find out the next day that there's $100 million Series D round that they had closed on. So I
Yeah.
turn it over to you for your
Yeah.
analysis now.
Yeah, because we didn't I mean, I think I intimated this in Slack right after the announcement came out. I was like, oh, okay. Like changes to the engine, changes to licensing when you have investor pressure to increase your profitability, right? Within a certain amount of time is a fairly standard practice. It just is, right? Like, any investor that's coming in um, is going to be looking at the exit terms, right? And you know this, right? Like, they're going to be looking at what it's going to take for you to be profitable enough that they will turn a profit. They'll double or triple or whatever their money within that 2-year, 18-month time horizon. And the fastest way to do that, at least from what this looks like from the outside, the fastest way to do that is, or one of the ways to do that is to limit the use of the community project so that people are guided into actually paying for the pro version. And as a business, that that's a decision that they can make. They're fully capable of making, and it's well within their rights to do that. So, I think the bad taste comes from there. To your point, right? Those couple of different things, right? Like community developed rules that have been put into that OSS rules package. Now you have to go and pull them. You can't include them in your product according to what the license is there, but you can still go retrieve them and use them because you're using them personally when you do that, right? But it does make it a little, there's one more hoop to jump through, right? But to Paul's point, right? Like if I have built something, if I've built a rule, I've contributed that to the community under one understanding, changing the rules does feel a little disingenuous. And then on the flip side, you were developing features for the community version that were they're in beta, they're in experimental mode. When you pull them out, it also does look a little bit shady that, hey, right, like we're only going to include these in the pro version now, or, we use the community version to develop the community to like make it effective. And now we're going to only include it in our commercial product. And that's where the whole idea of, it feels like a rug pull comes from. I go back and forth because experimental features jump into projects all the time and then get pulled out. Whether or not it was something that maybe the community engine couldn't support, or I'm sure they have other reasons as well why they pulled it out. Maybe stability, maybe something else goes along with it. What I'm going to here is I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. We know that these guys that there's good people over there, right? On both sides of this, and that's where it gets a little dicey or difficult, or you feel like you're walking an edge when we are talking about it, is because we know people on both sides of this debate, or both of these projects, and everybody's just trying to do their best, and everybody's trying to make money in the space.
I mean, I think I want to expand on the like pressures that they're facing though, because when you go through, the announcement went out, dry run our funding and all that. We raised 8.7 mil and all that stuff. So I've gone through the process, right, and more than once of raising money and talking to investors and all that fun stuff. And I can tell you that there's two questions that tend to come up. They're kind of the same variation of the same question, really, which is, what's your durable advantage? That's one you hear. And what's your moat? That's that other one you hear. So, what's your moat? What's your durable advantage? And what they're really trying to say is, how's somebody not going to come along in a few years and, kick your teeth in as a product, right? And take your customer base, essentially, right? I mean, that's probably a more blunt way of putting it, but that's what they're asking. And if I'm going through that conversation, and this is for a small amount, right? We raised 8.7 mil. These folks have raised lots of money over the years. Yeah. Lots of money. Lots more than just this 100 million in Series D. So there's a lot of players. There's a lot of invested folks, for the outcome of this company. And of course, if you're one of those people, the shareholders, you're going to ask questions like, and a potential investor, you're going to ask questions like, well, okay, you have this AST parsing pattern matching product with some stuff that's tied into it. Now you've got like an AI assistant that tries to, read the results of your things and give some code advice. Cool. How do you stay relevant in 3 years as the world is going AI native? And that's obviously eating the world. And, what are you going to do? And now you got to look at all your competitors who are building, or a decent number of competitors that are building their products based off of your, underpinning, or what underpins that product is Semgrep's, product, their engine and their rules. And you're like, okay, well, how do we protect that interest? Because that's your thing right now. Because I think like the truth is that in their release, like, and I want everything. I actually like Semgrep a lot. I like the people at Semgrep. I also just like as a practitioner, I think it was one of the best things that someone could have done pre AI, and I mean that pre AI. That was the best thing that I think we all could have hoped for. It's not the best thing we can hope for now. So that's why you have to look at, well, how do I take this technology we built our entire company around, make it relevant for this new foundational technology, and also protect our interests. You have to do all those things at the same time. That's a really hard thing to do. There's a lot of money on the line. So this is me saying exactly what you're saying. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt. I've in a very lesser capacity been in somewhat in those shoes and had those conversations and know what considerations go into something like this and why you would make a change like this. And I understand it. So long as it doesn't negatively impact the broader community, go for it. You got to do something, right? You got to stay relevant.
Yeah.
You gotta iterate. And I'm sure they're going to come up with something really, really innovative and cool and what's next. But I hate to say this, and I'll just say this about any company, like AST parsing and lexical analysis or pattern matching is dead. Like it's going to be, if it's not dead now, it's going to be dead soon. I can show you why. I can shout it from the rooftops. I think there's companies showing why, but you have to find a durable advantage for the future. So anyways, that's like my really long-winded way of kind of tying it all together, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, you're absolutely right. And that's, it would be interesting to be a fly on the wall to observe what's going on internally at Semgrep right now. Obviously, they're in like a hyper growth pattern. They've acquired other companies. They do want to prevent, stealing of their IP, right? Like any company is going to be in that same boat. They've offered this for a number of years, but they do have to protect themselves against the future. The 100 million, like they do mention, that Semgrep version 2 is going to be LLM backed. So they're obviously doing the same sorts of analysis. And it wouldn't surprise me if they also allow, right? Like there's nothing that prevents another company going to Semgrep and saying, hey, we would like to license your Pro engine for use and Pro rules for use within our product, right? And then we're going to do our LLM bits and everything else on top of that. Yes, it does cut into your profitability as well as an external company to Semgrep. But when you are using someone else's tech, this is what happens, right? This is what can happen over time. So I get both sides. I get this this desire to, hey, you have an open source version. You have now forked that open source version, and we're going to do that so we can continue to utilize that technology within our product. And it's going to fork, right? Like there's going to be an obvious split in the road. There's going to be obviously rules that will work for Semgrep that won't work for OpenGrep and vice versa. Like that standard is going to go away. But then to your point, right, in 5 years, is this really going to matter? Because we will be using LLM based tools. We're going to be using other things that maybe don't need this to underpin those products anymore.
Yeah, and let me give you a concrete example of that, right? If for this happened this morning, we had one of our clients reach out and say, all right, we have this we've got this and this isn't about my company. This is just what the technology that underpins our product and other products as well. So not just us, other, LLMs underpin other products. But I'll give you an example of like why things are changing and how specifically. So for example, this morning got a request via Slack. Hey, this company has all kinds of different technology stacks and they have it's funny. It's like your thing, right? Username enumeration. They're actually really afraid of username enumeration given the type of business they're in. That's all I can say. Those are the only details I can get into, but I can tell you it's all kinds of different technology stacks. And the type of messages that come back from enumeration vary, as you and I know. You can't write a pattern for every potential variation of username or messages that come back that indicate username presence, as well as just things that are like, more behavioral, more timing related, whatever it might be, right? Meaning additional operations occur if the user exists versus not, and then that indicates the presence of the username, whatever, right? So enumeration and in all its forms. Yeah, it takes like 2 seconds to write a rule that detects variations in not 2 seconds, maybe a couple minutes of fiddling to make sure it's just repeatable every time. And you can apply it against every tech stack and just ask pretty broad questions about like, hey, do you see variations in username, the presence of usernames being here or not, or whatever? Like, I forget the full thing that we started experimenting with, but it's like very, very simple, a very, very simple question. And then of course there's a lot that goes on in the back end, a whole set of like chain of thought and reasoning and reflection that occurs to get the right answer. But like, from my perspective, I don't have to go and write like a ton of specific patterns and rules and all that stuff. I'm just asking broad questions and allowing analysis to occur as if a code reviewer is doing it, right? And this is not a pitch for my product. I'm not saying it's only us that can do this. I'm saying this is this is just the reality of what's out there now, and other products as well. And so it's like, again, you're gonna have to find a way to innovate towards if you're just worrying about pattern matching. And so the reason I'm saying this is like, yes, now there's OpenGrep, great. That'll remain useful for as long as you see as a user of OpenGrep, whatever specific reasons you may have to use it. But again, I don't even know if long-term that project is going to matter in 2 years. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I don't even know if OpenGrep is going to matter here. Anyways, all right. That's enough of me just being like, all right, getting deep into it. But I'm telling you, man,
Yeah.
I work in this every day, and I'm like, why would I choose this over that? It's like I don't see it. So, anyways,
yep. Yeah, and I did install the new OpenGrep Alpha client. I downloaded it, scanned like VTM with it, right? Compared it with what Semgrep is coming out with. They're using the same rules, so it's the same exact output, right? Like between the two right now, which is exactly what you would expect from an early fork. I don't expect them to diverge that quickly, and take it with a grain of salt, right? Like if you're using one versus the other right now, realistically, it doesn't matter. On the ground as an AppSec practitioner, it's more about what does the future look like, and yeah, to your point, does it matter in 5 years? I don't know if it does, but for now, use it. Right? Like use whichever one is more effective for you.
Oh, the last thing I should say, sorry, about Semgrep is like, if people don't realize their backstory, the founders are like technical founders. I believe MIT graduates. So these are like, between the awesome branding and awesome team behind Semgrep, and between the founders, sort of that technical, innovative sort of mindset. I just want to say, like, I see good things for the company, right? So I don't want to give the impression that. I just think the type of analysis we've been performing for the last few decades is just not going to be there soon. That's all I'm trying to say.
Well, and I mean, it becomes even more interesting as someone that, like, as a third-party reviewer, most of what I do on a daily basis is really a form of pattern matching, right? It's human-based pattern matching at this point, right? Because we're looking for anomalies in code, in application responses, dynamic responses, in interactions that an application or a human has with an application, or that a computer has when interacting with a web service, right? Like all the pattern matching, all the things that we're doing will slowly be replicated within an LLM, because that pattern matching, it's fuzzy logic, it's fuzzy pattern matching that we're doing over time, and it's recognition of, like you and I always talk about our gut, right? We always talk about, especially in the secure code review course, to trust your gut when it comes to seeing things that are odd or off. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm fascinated to watch, what an LLM recognizes and what it sees as kind of the anti patterns that we typically identify when we're doing an assessment, whether that be code or dynamic. I mean, I don't think it's replacing us right now from from a technology perspective because it's pretty immature. But over time, you're going to see it get better and better.
Yeah, I don't think it's replacing us anytime soon. I do think, and I don't want to get off on man, because we got
We're on
other stuff to
tangents.
talk about. And I
Yeah.
know I'm always talking about actually, I'll be honest, man. I went on LinkedIn the other day and it dawned on me, I was like, it's stressing me out now. And it's stressing me out because of all the freaking AI articles. I'm like trying to keep up. And it's just sometimes on the weekend, I just need a weekend. I don't want to like look at any more of that stuff, but I cannot seem to get away with it. So I don't want to keep doing that to our listeners and viewers and shoving it down their throats forever. But the reality is that software is changing and we talk about software. So that's why it comes up a lot, right? I mean, software development is changing. I know, man, we showed Windsurf. And if you haven't seen it, go back a couple episodes, watch it. Don't listen, watch it on YouTube to get an idea of that tool. But man, I've been incorporating more and more of these tools into my development experience. It's changing the way I'm writing software. The velocity is much, I'm shipping code much quicker. And so I see sort of a change and shift in all sides of software, whether it's security or QA or development or whatever. So it's all just changing so freaking rapidly. And that's why I say it's like that and it's not just our tooling, right? Like if our processes don't change, good luck,
Yeah.
man. Our processes have to change. Like, and they can. So I don't know. We're in a renaissance, I feel like right now, and it's fun to watch. But
Mhm.
anyways, this is a tough topic, man. Because like like you said, I like Semgrep. I like the people over there. I understand and like some of the companies involved in the OpenGrep bit. And at the end of the day, I think objectively, I look at all this and I'm sort of like, well, it only matters for a little bit.
Mhm.
Bottom line.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Cool. Um, okay. With that, we'll close out the Semgrep OpenGrep discussion and move on to see. Do you want to talk about the top 10? Do you want to talk about that secure web
the,
framework from Google?
the Google one, probably. I'd be
Okay.
happy to chat through with you.
Okay. All right. Let's jump into that because I have feelings about this too, and I know you do as well. Um, and part of this goes back to early days in absolute AppSec lore. We had Jim Manico on the podcast, right? Manico came on, and his big thing was this idea of the one true framework, right? Like eventually, we were just going to have a framework that solved all our security problems, and that's what we've been driving for since the dawn of the web, I guess I should say. Um, and so this article specifically, and maybe let me show it here, right? I'm going to share my screen and we can kind of talk through it. But this article from Google, it's from the bughunters.google.com, their blog, um, goes into how they actually secure their platform using a high assurance web framework. So the way that they go about allowing developers to develop new products or enhance their current product set in a secure manner that leads to less vulnerabilities over time. Um, and I do want to give kudos to this idea that they have eliminated or severely reduced classes of vulnerabilities due to very focused research and implementation and education within their organization. Um, you know, the and this goes specifically to cross-site scripting because cross-site scripting to them is a big deal. But you see over the years how many or how the numbers have reduced, right? Like so 2014, 2015, the number of vulnerabilities that came in through their whatever bug bounty researchers or other ways into their platform has reduced significantly since then, which is awesome, right? Like that's their vulnerability rewards program. So they're still paying out, but going from 150 or close to it, or 100 plus, to looks like about 20 to 25 per year. It's pretty impressive, especially given the amount of engineers, given the amount of code that's being slung, the new features that are being pushed, right? Like that's an impressive feat. However, it does feel like they've got a little bit of blinders on, and they do recognize this, right? They talk about the challenges of web security. They talk about how Google has a different perspective on web security than most other companies do, right? And that's what they talk about here. Our focus here is on web security vulnerabilities stems from the fact that almost all Google services are exposed as web apps, where a client-side vulnerability like XSS could completely compromise a user's data. So while it might seem that XSS is less impactful than attacks, yeah, you can read it, perform directly against web servers. Yeah.
I can read.
Yeah, apparently I can't, right? Well, those are XSS is extremely critical to Google and something they go to great lengths to prevent, right? So they're not worried about remote code execution or SQL injection because of the nature of their applications. You think about using Google Workspace, right? Like if someone gets access to my Google token, right? They have access to Drive, they have access to like all sorts of things and all those dependencies that we have for Google. So I get it. And I also appreciate that that's the focus that they have here. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Like I'm going off a little bit, but what are your thoughts as far as that goes?
Well, you said it, which is they got kind of focused on, a specific subset of things, but it does make sense as to like, because when they explain, what their subset of things they care about, like why they care about it. I do want to point out though, because we talked about this ahead of the show. I was like, well, this is because they said like, encryption, injection, and isolation. Those are like ultimately the three things that underpin all the vulnerabilities of the web. And I think we need to make a distinction here. And really, they need to make a distinction. What they're talking about, I assume, is more of the web browser experience, what affects, web browser clients, and not the web, because obviously REST APIs that have nothing but JSON responses coming back, but are communicated with over web protocols are web APIs. And so that's, I'd argue those actually suffer mostly from access control and authorization related issues versus any of these things. And they don't fall under any of these categories. So, I think if you're just looking at it from the scope of the browser, it's like maybe. Okay. And then I think the other thing is, and you said this, which is like killing off a class of vulnerability. That's a pretty common technique these days, right? Like that's not, great article. I enjoyed it, but it's enlightening. But I wouldn't say any of this is I mean, they talk about things we've all been doing and talking about at conferences and doing in our environments for a while now, which is like they talk about safeguard rails, about observability, about killing off whole classes of bugs, about empathy first with developers. I mean, none of that rings as like novel new things, but it is interesting to see how Google says, and actually, what was interesting in this article that somewhere in here. Oh yeah, that one. It says, see our security signals paper. So they have a white paper that breaks down. I downloaded it. It's fairly interesting. It talks about their opinions about observability and how to create like thresholds for, detecting things going wrong in an application. So I feel like that was a very interesting white paper that everyone should, who's maybe wants to nerd out for a little bit, should go check out. I did like the individual controls that they list at the bottom of this article where they talk, because there were a couple things I actually don't think I had seen before, or I hadn't really, it was like if you go down to keep going, it's this list, but in that list, it was safe response types. An automated conformance check should ensure that all HTTP responses are built via API abstractions that guarantee that they are constructed in an XSS-free way, and safe auto-escaping. So that sounds like, if I had to kind of just, compile that one down, it would be like, oh, they've got some sort of like abstraction that you can feed responses through to make sure that they're normalized and free of XSS. But also along those lines, they mentioned somewhere in here about contextual auto escaping. Oh yeah, no, it's literally right below it. Contextual auto escaping template system, which is contextual, or makes decisions on the context of the content coming in, whether that's, computer generated, user supplied, and then whether or what things they would have to do to escape those values. I think those two were the two that popped out the most, because all this other stuff I've seen and implemented myself, and whatever, all normal standard stuff, but I still like it all listed out. So you asked me what my opinion is. My opinion is, zooming out, this article's somewhat interesting, covers some, at least exposes some ways that Google's going about both prioritizing what vulnerabilities they want to eliminate and why, and how they're doing that. And again, that's good article, but I wouldn't say it's mind blowing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, not necessarily mind blowing. I mean, initially when I pulled it up, I thought, oh, they're releasing a web framework, right? Like they're releasing something that we can all use. And while the strategy is there, it isn't this idea of the one true framework that we've talked about in the past. That being said, the key, what is it? What do they call it here? The elements of a high assurance web framework. Safe coding. Yeah, that's a term. Where does that go? Yeah, developer ecosystems for software safety, like security requirements. They're building out a secure SDLC, right? All that stuff. Like, I mean, these are topics that we have addressed multiple times. Adaptability, guardrails, observability. My favorite is logging and monitoring, right? Like, so I love to see it actually pop up in this manner. But the security signals that they are taking a little bit deeper. So like, I agree with all of the outcomes that they are talking about here. When I talk about key security controls, this list is great, but this is also a list focused on Google. Right? And that's my big takeaway here is this is a natural progression in a security program for a large company, that they become very focused on the threats that are inherent in their platform. So their key security controls are not going to be the same as Bank of America. They're just not, right? And so you've got to take it with a grain of salt, and you've got to apply it to your own threat model locally with whatever company you work for or whatever organization or that you are dealing with. This list of key security controls is going to be different based on your threat profile. And I don't know how else to
One thing
to focus on that. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No. I mean, actually, I'm just adding to what you're saying. Like one thing too is like, yes, everybody's list is different of the things, like the vulnerabilities they have to prioritize. But I will say, if you are rendering back user supplied input anywhere, which is like, most companies, I just want to add that like, it's always a good idea to go about looking at some of these basic protections like CSP and whatnot, because it's like you're going somebody. I have said this before, and I will say it again. I have introduced XSS accidentally before. I did it myself. I didn't understand how the frame, or I mean, it was a little bit of a bug in the framework, but it's whatever. It doesn't matter. It's like I introduced XSS. That's the result. Whatever led up to that is whatever. And my point being is, if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's going to happen. It's just too hard to prevent, or ensure that you're always safely, your developers are always safely coding and never going to introduce XSS. It just happens. So
Mhm.
it's like silly to not at least address this vulnerability class. But sorry, I did interrupt you.
No,
I
no,
apologize. Yeah.
it's great because you, as a developer, as a security engineer, you're implementing application security for an organization. The basics are the basics, right? The low hanging fruit is stuff that we still have to care about, right? Like they even go into strict dependency controls, right? Like all libraries must be, reviewed to mitigate build time supply chain attacks. Yeah, like this has been the software supply chain. We know that there's issues that come through that. Obviously, Google has been hit by this in the past as well. So, like, those are the sorts of things that we've got to make sure that are in place for the guardrails. But your overall, list of key security controls for your organization are going to differ just based on your threat profile and the space that you're in. I mean, not all of us are serving up millions of, whatever, right? Like Gmail has to be one of the largest email providers in the world. It is. And most people, or a lot of people, are actually using web applications to access that email. So all of those inherent risks that are in there are going to be different for Google than it is for a company that is doing loan applications or, is a social media site. It just, yeah, it's naive to think that their list is going to match exactly what yours is going to be. And by only solving for what you see here, that you're going to prevent vulnerabilities from occurring within your organization.
Yeah, I agree. These are great if you're like a heavily web browser centric company, um,
Mm-hmm.
as they are. But and actually, that graph you showed in the beginning, where like I was thinking about it while you're saying it, is like the graph shows it goes up and then it goes down, right, in terms of discovered and reported issues. And I was like, well, yeah, that. It's like, well, surely in 2024 they didn't have less web services than they did in 2014. I mean,
Yeah.
Google is pretty famous for killing off things, but I can't imagine as the company's gone on and as they've grown, yeah, that they've had less web services. So it's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good trend. It's a good trend. I'm just giving them some additional kudos, I guess.
Some additional kudos. Yeah.
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 So
Yeah. I don't know if there's much more else to say to that. Um,
mhm.
I don't know. Any other takeaways before we can move on to, we can run through one more article or whatever before we're done today.
No, no, not really.
Okay.
I was thinking of a clever joke, but no, I got nothing. I'm not clever today or ever.
Yeah, whatever. Right. Multiple layer improve maintainability. Yeah, like I go through and read it because it is useful as an AppSec practitioner to see how they're approaching it. One thing that I always struggle with is that the organizations that I deal with, um, maturity levels just differ so wildly between organizations from a security
You.
perspective, right? Like, and even in like the startup space, like, um, it's all dependent on management and like how seriously the organization itself takes security, but it usually flows from the top, right? If the executives are concerned about it, or you've got somebody in a high level that wants to make sure things are done appropriately, it happens. If you have people that aren't educated about it, it's usually an afterthought, and that leads directly to different reports or different results when it comes to assessments that we do, mitigation of vulnerabilities across multiple things. So don't expect your organization to be as mature as Google is or as Netflix is, but it is eye-opening to see what they actually do and implement some of the same techniques with the organization that you're currently working with.
Yep. And
Sweet.
actually, I will
Yeah,
add that you're right about like with painting in broad strokes, obviously, but what I've experienced with software developers. Sorry. What I mean is, you were saying that executive buy-in, and I will say, like, especially with software developers, I've noticed a trend where, again, broad strokes here, but they're like, tell them the problem you need solved, the story behind why you need it solved, and boom, it's like, cool, I'm locked in, let's go solve that. So it's it really is about whoever's sort of pushing direction that's gonna have a pretty big impact on all of that. And yeah, you might get your awesome devs who just like decide that they want to dig in for their own, but on the whole, it's better to just have that executive buy-in. For our next article, do you mind if I go over the Orange Tsai one? That's the number
sure.
one spot on the web. Gosh,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Portswigger top
Sure.
10 web hacking techniques.
Yep, yep. I can put
Cool.
that in there. Oh, you got it. Yeah.
I got it. Don't worry about it.
So Orange
Um,
Tsai, yeah. So just as background, top 10 techniques of 2024. The list has been voted on um, by Portswigger and the community, and um, Orange Tsai's confusion attacks took the number one slot. Right. Um, I don't know about you. Orange Tsai is amazing, but it does like give
yeah.
me like imposter syndrome to the to the next level. But yeah, let's get
Nah,
into
Orange
the
Tsai is an
actual.
outlier. It's
Yeah,
fine.
it's
Um,
fine. There's always going to be
at
outliers,
GitHub,
right? Yeah,
I've talked about this on the podcast before. At GitHub, Orange Tsai like did a good job of ripping some of our stuff up and posting. Of course we like, yeah, he did the blog post afterwards with everyone's blessing because it was like, man, you're really really good. But yeah, I mean, I think if you've been in the space, Orange Tsai's work and Orange Tsai, and you know that this person is pretty great at finding some complex stuff. And I just thought this was, I don't even need to go through all the technical details here. I guess I can keep it pretty high level because it's just fascinating. But, I'll give you the background here. Orange Tsai said that in this article, they're looking for their next big target, thing that they was going for basically high impact style of research. So finding bugs in something that affects and impacts the majority of the internet kind of thing. And so decided to focus on HTTPD with Apache and Apache's HTTP server. And specifically, this is what I thought was so neat. Um, the reason for this is that it's a very modular system. And however, there's a decent handful of or a big portion of those modules that are just default, just used outright. So if you find flaws in these modules, it's a pretty good chance someone's actually using it. But here's where it got interesting. And this is where, for me, it felt like an overlap of what we've seen with service oriented architectures or microservices, right? Where because it's modular, there's this structure of a request, right? An HTTP request, and this structure is uniform everywhere, and it gets passed around to each individual module in the server. However, each individual module is not aware of the other module's use and intention and all of that. And furthermore, it doesn't necessarily account for how specific bits of that structure are going to be used. And so one of the examples would be that he shows down here. Sorry, scrolling. I want to say, yeah, our file name. So this actually can be either a file path or a URL, depending on how you decide to interpret that, right? That's just one of, think about just that alone, file name versus URL confusion, and what that could lead to in a modular system. And why do I say this? Because some of the worst authorization flaws I've seen are when a authorization, like in a microservices distributed system, right, is when a front end does whatever authorization bits it's going to do and then repackages the request and distributes that out to different authorization and actor context unaware services, which then process that probably make decisions based off of what's in the parameters of that type of request. And maybe if there's a mismatch, and often there is a mismatch between what the authorization server thought it was authorizing against versus what is actually included in the full contents of the request, then there becomes parsing and confusion issues where then it's like, I guess what I'm saying is like, oh, I'm able to, I don't know, delete a resource that I wasn't supposed to delete because it thought it was authorizing me for access to some other ID in the request, for instance, right? That's a very basic example. And so this is interesting because it's that same sort of concept applied to the HTTP server and the modules therein of Apache. So I'm going to pause there and like, I'm curious, like, uh, have you been able, I know this is kind of probably last minute and I don't know if you were able to read through much of this. So A, let's start there. And then B, does that sound right? Like, have you seen that with service-oriented architectures, or have you yourself experienced anything with Apache HTTP that you're like, oh yeah, I've seen this in practice?
Well, it's yes, right. Like in short, I have, right. I think I've talked about like URL confusion in the past, or parameter, like path confusion, because you've got, again, modules that do take into account, do URL decode things, but then other modules will not. And you're doing decisioning based on a regular expression in one module, and in the other one, you're just decoding it and allowing access into specific places. So the more that you depend on these various systems, the more that mismatch can have devastating impact, especially from an authorization perspective. Now, a lot of what Orange Tsai is going into here is internal to Apache itself, right? Like the module system that's based in Apache. And I do appreciate that, like ripping it apart and starting to talk about how the different pieces actually work together. Because, part of the issue that I run into over time is that we have this inherent trust of these underlying technology pieces that have been developed over the last 20, 30 years, right? Like we have Nginx, we have Apache, we have Tomcat, we have all these servers that have been built, along with their whole subsystem of libraries that go into that. And because they're open source, we have a certain level of trust that goes into it, that, hey, as long as it's stable, it must be secure because it's open source and anybody can look at the code. But what we're seeing here is, oh, okay, so the core Apache subsystem, right, or environment probably is secure in this manner, and it's just passing off these requests to each of the modules in turn based on the configuration. But the modules themselves don't get the same scrutiny because maybe they don't get as much use, maybe they don't, right? Like that interaction is not necessarily what is reviewed, especially in an environment where you're using multiple modules. I would expect the test suites in these cases. And I'm going really deep here, Ken. I'm sorry. You can tell me to shut up if
No,
you
I
want.
like this. This is what I wanted.
But the way the test cases are usually written for most of the software, and software in general, is very isolated, right? There are integration tests that happen to make sure that there's functionality that that works across multiple modules in this case. But most of the really underlying like fuzzing that goes on is, hey, I fired up Apache, I fired up the mod rewrite module, and then I sent it. I did all my fuzz tests against it using libfuzzer or whatever it is. But I didn't necessarily look at the case where I'm using mod rewrite with mod CGI, for example, or something else that's out there that includes manipulation of that object that's being sent around, and then these edge cases that can pop up. So I get how it happens. So I appreciate this like level of depth, and also the level of understanding that goes into actually the research behind it. In my case, why I say like, oh man, this gives me imposter syndrome is I know that like this is the stuff that I learned to do very early on in my career, right? And it feels like most of the scoping that I do from a security perspective is, oh, well, we consider Nginx to be off the table. We consider Apache to be off the table because it gets very expensive to pay a consultant to actually review at this level, right? Like this is months of research that goes into it, all summarized in an article that you can read in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Your bit about testing and isolation, that is, man, is that a quintessential issue around microservices and
Yes.
testing them? Because yeah, you're right. Like you can test in isolation. And actually, this has been an argument for why dynamic analysis beats SAST when you talk about that kind of architecture. And it makes sense, right? It's like DAST is in that sense treating it as a whole system versus SAST, which would be individually reviewing the code bases of each individual component for vulnerabilities that match like OWASP top 10 plus style web security issues, right? But that's probably not the actual thing that you're going to it's access control is authorization and things of that nature for sure, right? I shouldn't say you're not, but those tools like a SaaS tool looking at one code base doesn't have enough information. And clearly the tools we've talked about, not to beat a horse to whatever's past death, but they don't have any reasoning built in. There's no self-reflection. There's no analysis. It's just look for these patterns and you're doing that in isolation. But when you do it dynamically, you're looking at the totality of the interactions inside of the system. And yes, you don't have as much visibility without code, but at the same time, you have, in a sense, more visibility because you can see things flow throughout the system, map it all out, observe the responses, observe the behavior. I know we've had people on who are trying to marry up those two things for that specific purpose. But this is the issue. What you just said is testing in isolation is the reason that very nuanced, difficult to detect flaws tend to creep in on these, distributed systems.
Yeah. And honestly, most of the really impactful vulnerabilities that I found over the course of my career have been because I have access to code, number one, and a running environment, right? So I know I always make the joke that penetration testers are really just QA testers that do it poorly and don't really like document things well. But really they are doing an integration test in a dynamic environment. The more information that you give someone like an Orange Tsai or your penetration testers in general, if you are in AppSec, you should be helping them as much as possible to get to that state where they have a full environment to actually test against, so that you can find those sorts of vulnerabilities. This is what you want out of an integration test from a QA test perspective, but out of a security penetration test, that's the sort of interaction that you're going to want to see in order to get the best results. Yeah. Anyway, what else on that article? I do want to be cognizant we are at about an hour. Surprise, right? Like it flies
I guess I don't know. That's why I'm kind of like bubbling up the key relevant parts. I guess just read through it because it's not a hard read, and I don't think like anyone who's listening to this podcast or reading this podcast would struggle with the technical details. It's just more interesting to see how things like the path truncation and rewrite flag assignment and all these seemingly little things kind of add up to some pretty serious flaws. There's like a ton of CVs that dropped out of this research presented on at Black Hat and a couple other conferences. So anyways, go give it a read. It is, as you can see as I scroll here, not a short article, but it is not a technically difficult article, and it's just worth reading. It's cool research. It's just fun. Stuff to read. So go check it out.
Yeah,
I did look at the other categories. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Yep. There's a lot of cool use cases. That's where I'm starting to get into. So yeah, go read it. Yeah. What were you going to say about the other categories?
No, I looked at the other categories. There were some other. The one that stuck out to me was looking at DOM purifies or bypasses to DOM purifies tooling. That's another article that I did not get to, but it is on the Portswigger. This thing that you posted, this link here, Portswigger's top 10 web hacking techniques. So, anyways, just pointing out that there's other really cool articles that people can go and check out from
Sweet.
that list.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, that's going to close it out for today. As I said, we'll be in Phoenix at CactusCon later this week, Thursday night. I'm sure. Yeah, we'll post in Slack about it if you happen to be there. Ken and I will be there. Plus, we'll see who else comes along.
One of our upcoming guests is going to be there. Kyle from Tynes.
Yeah.
Kyle from Tynes. I can't wait. Yeah. Tynes is, I know I keep talking about it. I have no, like I literally have, we have nothing tied as a podcast to Tynes. I just freaking think the product's cool and I keep playing with it and I love it. And so it's really nice to know that we get Kyle on the podcast here soon. But anyways,
it'll be interesting to talk through use cases. Yep.
Especially,
why?
Do you know why I'm excited for CactusCon? And it's not just because it just started snowing here and it's in Phoenix. It's nice, but I gotta say, I go to a lot of conferences, as you know, and so do you. And like, sometimes it's nice to go to a conference to get you back to your original roots. Like the first hacker conference I ever went to was ShmooCon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first, I think I went there 4 years in a row before I finally got sick of the ticketing system and all that stuff and got annoyed and became a grumpy old man. But it reminds me of that, right? It reminds me of that atmosphere, that culture. But the talks at CactusCon are phenomenal. Highly curated, great talks. They have this insane set of villages that rock. The badge hacking is, you and I were soldering last year, just sitting down, soldering badges, having a good time. I don't know, man. It just feels like a hobbyist conference and like what I deeply miss at times, and I really love it. So, yeah, it's a cool conference.
Yeah. It's a good one. It's definitely a good one. We've been doing that one for a few years. So, all right. Well, we will see everyone either at CactusCon or next week. And actually, I think it's confirmed who we've got coming on next week, right, Ken? If I remember right,
I don't know. Actually, I kind of afraid to say it. So we'll say. Wait, was it? Was it confirmed? It was confirmed. Okay, I take that back. Okay, so we're going to be an hour earlier next week. Is it okay if I announce this? I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. So I worked with Miles Borens from when I was at GitHub. Miles essentially was the main developer around NPM. We had worked on some hairy situations like account takeover stuff and protections being put into the put into the NPM ecosystem. I know we've had a lot of talks about this. I know Paul McCarty has been really hitting NPM package security stuff pretty hard lately and posting about it and all of that. And so we just felt it was a good time. And I got lucky. I just happened to reach out to Miles for a different thing. Actually just telling him, you know what, it came about because I just reached out and I was like, hey, I just wanted to tell you, I do this sometimes with people I've worked with in the past where I just tell them, hey, I liked working with you and here's why. I don't know. It's just, I feel like if you have nice things to say, you should always say things. Anyways, we got to talking more and this came up and the time was right. And I'm so excited. So point being, you definitely don't want to miss next week's guest. You definitely don't want to miss this. We're going to talk about some of the stuff we went through with NPM. It's a big deal, folks. Like we're going to shout this one from the rooftops and get everybody ready for it.
And he's been one of the main developers. I first met Miles, when you and I worked together years ago. Like he gave a talk at Code Mash, right? when I was there with Ernie of all people, right? Like we went and saw Miles talk about NPM and like everything that he was currently doing. I even think it was like Node.js development that he was doing at the time, right? Like he's yeah, it is confirmed. Yeah. So yes, you will want to listen because he's super smart, super great engineer. I mean, he's over at What Snowflake. I posted his LinkedIn profile in Slack. So yeah, we'll get the episode scheduled and promote it here shortly as well on all the various social media channels. But it'll be a fun one.
Yeah. And actually, this brings me to a point too. Like, there are some things we will not be able to talk about, both Miles and I, and there will be things that we can talk about. And I'm begging you, if you are really interested in this topic of NPM security, please send me a DM or Seth a DM or both of us, or you can put it in Slack if you want in the general channel, whatever. It doesn't matter. However you want to do it. Please, if you have a question that you really want answered by Miles, send those in advance, and I'm going to forward them on to Miles and make sure that, you know, we have a discussion on what is okay to talk about and what's not. Because again, like both he and I, you know, we work for a company and we got to be careful about some of the things we say. I have a penchant for saying too much. So, you know, hopefully he'll keep me honest. But yeah, so please send those questions ahead of time. This would be a really fun one.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today, and we will see you all next week. Come ready with your questions, and otherwise, yeah, have a good week. We'll talk to you then.